Welcome to the Nightclub, guys. It's your host, the Night Wrencher. I am right now continuing on from the series that I previously had ongoing, which was building a carburetor for high horsepower, or in reality, just building your own custom carburetor using a myriad of different parts. So in the previous episode, I mentioned that I would have to modify this billet base plate. The main reason was because if I was to bolt this on to the main body that I have, and this is the gasket that came off of that main body, the idle circuit would not line up. So if we put the gasket up right here, you're going to see that this hole is plugged off, but this hole that I've already modified, I already went through and drilled this out, as you guys can see right here. So if you guys look closely, you'll notice that this is an oval shaped hole. It is actually reminiscent of the hole that's on the factory Barry Grant base plate. As you guys can see right here, it is in fact a nice oval hole with an indentation on the bottom to be able to feed this part of the circuit. So this can actually work with different types of main bodies versus this base plate that was not designed to work with specific main bodies. But it's okay, because with the Dremel, anything is really possible when we're talking about carburetors. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to go ahead and drill out the other side. So I've already marked out where the hole is going to start. I'm going to start with the small drill bit, and then I'm going to just drill it straight across to join these two holes together. And when I do that, I'm going to go ahead and step up the drill bit to 1 or 2 sizes higher, and then just keep making the hole bigger and bigger. Every time I make a cut, I'm going to go ahead and overlay the gasket that I'm going to be using to make sure that not only am I centered correctly in the hole that I'm going to be drilling, but also that the hole lines up with the gasket as close as possible. Because this is the idle circuit, you don't really want any kind of ledge. You don't really want any of the aluminum blocking the path of the fuel flow, so you're going to want that as perfect as possible. As you can see, I have this one pretty much perfect, so I'm going to go ahead and get started on this one right here. Alright, so I just finished up the drilling. I'm going to go ahead and move this into a close-up. Remember that you guys should really clean these parts completely inside and out. Try to blow it out with compressed air whenever you do any kind of drilling on these things, because whatever you leave in here is going to go straight into the motor, and you don't want to cause any kind of damage just because you wanted to modify your carburetor. So if you guys look closely, I have the oval shaped hole on this end right here, and then I have the oval shaped hole on this end right here. You can't really catch it on camera too well, but if I go ahead and take the gasket that I was using earlier, you guys can see that it is lined up on both holes pretty much perfectly. Looks almost factory. One thing I do need to mention is that when you are cutting, make sure that the gasket is installed the same way every single time. This base plate has locating pins, which allows me to figure out more or less where the gasket's going to end up when it's on the carburetor. But these gaskets are not cut identical. If I go ahead and flip this upside down, all of a sudden the marks are moved. So you guys can see a lot of silver is now showing up here, and you can see that this one is still in good shape. So what you're going to do is, whenever you are modifying your carburetor, you got to make sure that the template that you're using is the exact same one every single time, because you're going to start oversizing all these holes and you're going to start running into problems. Another thing you're not going to want to do is actually drill into this passage straight down. And the reason for that is this is a calibrated hole, and the bigger it is, the more fuel it can carry. The more fuel it can carry, the more specific gravity it's going to have, and thus it's going to be dumping more fuel out of the idle hole, and you really don't want to do that. You want to leave that job to the idle feed restrictors. You don't want to leave that to this passage right here. It's all a very controlled system. Another thing is, this is the T-slot. This is the transition. In certain applications where you want to add more fuel in the transition, and you've already gone pretty high on in the idle feed restrictors, and you still can't get enough fuel in the transition, what you can do is actually take like very fine sandpaper or a mini file and actually start digging at this T-slot to make it a tiny bit bigger at a time, to maybe get a little bit more fuel flow. Hopefully that fills in a little bit of any kind of lean spot you might have. But before you actually start going into modifying the base plate, you should really try to max out the idle feed restrictors. And if you're not getting any more fuel through the idle feed restrictors, it's time to modify the T-slot. But this is a one-way street. You won't be able to go back after you modify the T-slot. So make sure you are going through the idle feed restrictors first, before you go into modifying the T-slot. Now that I have the base plate set up, I know I still need to clean everything, but I'm going to show you guys what I have so far. So I have the base plate gasket, I have the main body. This main body, in a previous episode, I actually re-drilled these holes and tapped them to this new air bleed size. And these are the correct size air bleeds for this carburetor. Before I used to have the sunken kind, or the smaller shouldered air bleeds, and I've upgraded them to the taller brass ones. If you guys want to check out that video, I'll have a link somewhere on the page or in the description. Because it's a square bore carburetor, it's kind of hard to tell which side's the primary side and which side's the secondary side, which in all reality, it doesn't really make a huge difference because the air bleeds are the same front to back, but we also have the same squirters. So if you were just looking at it like this, trying to identify which side's which, there's a couple ways that you can figure out which side's supposed to be the primary side, which side's supposed to be the secondary side. So usually the smooth side, or the stuff with less stuff, that's going to line up with your driver's side, and the side with a bunch of holes, this will be for your secondary side. So these holes are usually for vacuum secondary pods, so you can actually drill out this main body and convert it to a vacuum secondary. It actually has the passages right here. All you would need to do is get the right drill bits and drill out whatever you need. But this is a clear indicator that this goes to the passenger side and this goes to the driver's side. On the base plate, the side that has a throttle linkage goes to the driver's side. So we line up driver's side to driver's side, and there we go. We are good to go right here. I'm going to go ahead and put a couple screws in here, and the next order of business is to modify the fuel bowls. So as I mentioned in my last video, I needed to decide what kind of metering blocks I was going to use, and I settled on these. They look almost identical, but one's a primary side metering block and one's a secondary side metering block. They are both stock replacement style metering blocks. The reason I picked these is because they both have the whistle already put in, so I don't have to modify a whistle for one of these things. The second thing is because they're both drilled out already for a power valve, and the way you can tell that one's a primary and one's a secondary is that the primary has the idle drilled out and tapped, so I can put a plug in it, and on the secondary it does not. So we are going to be working on the secondary side here. So I'm just going to go ahead and install this just like so, and now I'm going to get the fuel bowl and place it right here so we can see where we have interference issues. So now that I got the fuel bowl here, you guys will be able to tell where the problem is. So if you guys see right here, I've actually got part of the accelerator pump assembly, the housing, this little guard, is actually contacting the base plate. So I can fix this in one of two ways. I can either trim the fuel bowl or trim the base plate. I don't really want to touch the base plate right here because I want to keep as much material as I can to keep this nice and strong. So this is just a little tab. It's really just for decoration. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of scribe a mark with my pointer, and I'm going to go ahead and actually cut this down with my Dremel. That's preventing the fuel bowl from sitting all the way flush. Another thing you're going to notice is that the edge of the fuel bowl right here is contacting as well. So I'm going to have to trim this so I can get this to seat nice and clean. You guys are going to notice that this base plate has provisions built into it so it can accommodate the passage for the accelerator pump. So this is a special passage drilled into all of these metering blocks. Whether it's a vacuum secondary or double pumper, it'll have these passages drilled in, and all you have to do is uncover them and you can use them, but they all have this notch. Because of that, these base plates, aftermarket base plates, have to leave a provision for that notch. This base plate's not designed for a Demon carburetor, which is why we are having fitting issues. So it's not the fact that this base plate is wrong, it's just the fact that this was designed for a standard Holley carburetor and not a Demon. If I take a standard Holley fuel bowl and I overlay it on top right here, you guys will be able to see that I can get everything to line up, and we shouldn't have any kind of interference issues because it was designed with a Holley carburetor fuel bowl in mind. But we already explained why I'm not going to be using them. I'm actually going to be using the Demon bowls. So this will go away for a little while I do the modifications. Alright, so I just finished up the clearancing. So the main issue was hitting right here on the corners. In fact, you can see right here there's a couple marks left over from when the fuel bowl was hitting the base plate. But now I went ahead and I trimmed whatever was unnecessary. So I did a little bit of trimming right here toward the bottom, a little bit of casting flash. You guys can still tell that there is casting flash right here, but as soon as we get over this ledge, it becomes smooth, nice, clean transition to right here. I'm sure I'm going to get a comment about how ugly the carburetor looks now that I took off the finish. And it's okay because I'm going to actually soda blast these on the outside and then powder coat them to a different color, so it doesn't matter how they end up because I'm going to do a little bit of polishing at the end and then I'm going to do some powder coating. On this side we had an issue as well, so I had to trim down this edge a little bit, round off this corner and this corner right here as well for the accelerator pump in order to get it to fit. So I did it without the gaskets because that would get me the closest that I possibly could to the base plate. And so if I assemble it all together, I can go ahead and just lift this pump arm, and then you guys will be able to tell that it gets super close, but not enough to touch it. Where we were having a little bit of an opening right here before, now it's completely sealed. We have no issues at all. One thing that I do need to stress is that when you are clearancing the fuel bowls, you got to stay away from the sealing surface of this gasket. So there's this little ridge right here. That's the sealing surface, and then there's a ridge up here that is also the sealing surface for these fuel bowls, not just for the Demons, but for Holleys in general. You want to stay completely away from that surface. If you nick this, you will get a leak, and without adding any kind of sealant, you're going to run into a lot of problems. So in order to double check our work, we're going to go ahead and add the missing gaskets. Okay, so I went ahead and added the missing gaskets. So we have the metering block gasket here. This is actually backwards. And then we have the bowl gasket right here. So let's make sure everything's lined up. Let's go ahead and lay this on the main body. And now we're going to go ahead and add the fuel bowl. And then if there was any kind of question about clearance, we should have more than enough clearance now. And in fact, we do have plenty of clearance. Nothing is touching. Everything is clear and good to go. And not even the part of the bottom of the fuel bowl where this part is removed completely, but this one still has a little bit of a piece attached to the fuel bowl that I could remove, but it doesn't look like it's contacting. Well, actually it is contacting a little bit. So if you guys look right here, this is why it's so important to double check these things. If you can see right here, this fuel bowl is contacting this base plate right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and trim this side a little bit, give it a little bit of clearance so we have no contact between this fuel bowl and the base plate. The last thing you want to do is have this fuel bowl cocked when you go in to install it, and you're going to have problems with either leakage or you're going to overstrain the main body. So we've got to go ahead and make sure we clearance this enough to avoid any kind of problems in the future. Alright, so I just finished up the clearancing on the primary side fuel bowl. So the only thing that's left to do is actually to do the same thing again. So grab a couple gaskets and make sure that everything lines up with appropriate tolerances taken into consideration. But I don't see why it wouldn't line up if everything lined up on the secondary side. So I'm just using used gaskets because that's what I have available. Eventually, probably soon, actually not eventually, but I'm going to buy a brand new rebuild kit, and this is going to get brand new gaskets all the way around. So the next time you guys see this carburetor, we're going to be finishing up a little bit of cleanup. We're going to take it all apart. We're going to put a fresh new rebuild kit in it. We're going to take baseline readings from the carburetor itself, and then we're going to assemble it, put it back together, and then put it on an engine to make sure it runs. So that's all for today. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher out.